Vinny Banga.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, very good evening to all of you. It is a privilege to introduce Dr. Vinny Banga. It is indeed a privilege to introduce Dr. Vinny Banga, who belongs to a rare breed of neurologist who has been trained in intervention neurology also, and he has a special interest in stroke also. He is MBBS MD medicine, and he has done BA neurology, and after that he has done fellowship in stroke and intervention neurology. He is a member of so many esteemed he holds a membership of a number of and his area of expertise includes stroke, and he has a vast experience. He has worked in many corporate hospitals, reputed corporate hospitals, and today, although the topic of discussion is not intervention neurology, we are going to discuss today what are the recent trends in epilepsy. Epilepsy is one such condition which is always intrigued and perplexed mankind ever since ever, and it continues to intrigue us as to what is epilepsy and what is not. So there are many challenges, sometimes very difficult even for an experienced epileptologist to differentiate whether the condition which the patient is presenting with epilepsy or it's epilepsy unique. And that is the first step. After that only the algorithm starts. This distinction is very important, and we have made a lot of great advances recently as far as drugs are concerned, the different modalities are concerned, non-pharmacological as well as other intervention, epilepsy surgery, we have taken great strides. So without further ado, I will hand over the mic to Dr. Vinny Banga. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. So at the outset, I'd like to thank everyone for sparing their time and coming this evening. I've been hearing great stories about this forum that you have been having regular webinars, and it indeed feels so great that some of you are very senior to me. Maybe like you have been a doctor before I was born, and it indeed feels great that you still have the zeal to come over every week to learn something new. So I'm basically a neurologist with special interest and training in neurointervention. So I'm basically a stroke specialist and interventional neurologist. A physician first, or a neurologist afterwards. So today, though the topic is epilepsy, I'll also share some bit of stroke, which I specialize in later part of the talk. But we are going to talk about in the initial part about the newer anti-epileptic drugs. So epilepsy, we know, like it's one of the tip of iceberg disease, because many patients don't come to the physicians very early in the course because of some stigma or something. So I'll directly jump on to the renaming of the anti-epileptic drugs. So they were initially known as anti-convulsant drugs, but not all the seizures are convulsive. There can be non-convulsive seizures. Then they were called as anti-epileptic drugs, but not all the patients who are on these drugs have epilepsy. Even some patients who have a single seizure, they are not having epilepsy. Sometimes you give them there. Then there was anti-seizure drug. So this was again a wrong nomenclature. Currently, we call them as anti-seizure medication, ASM. It's the new terminology for anti-epileptic drugs or anti-seizure drugs. So, we'll discuss something about the older anti-epileptics, the newer ones, and then the newer ones which we'll discuss in detail about lacosamide, brivaracetam, and perampanel. And we'll discuss some other newer drugs, but we'll discuss some case scenarios as well. So, the aim of the treatment for any anti-seizure medication is to provide the patient complete freedom of seizure with as many avoidable side effects as possible, and to ensure that the patient has a good cognitive well-being and as well as the general well-being. So all in all, any medicine has the same thing. Even if you take paracetamol, the main aim of paracetamol is to get rid of fever and then not have any side effects. The same is true for the anti-epileptic drug. But because you'll have to take it for a very long time, it's very important that it doesn't have well-being. So there are now around 25 anti-epileptic drugs which have been very recently diagnosed, very commonly used. They have been used in pregnancy, lactation, special situation, women with epilepsy, children with epilepsy, patients with polytherapy, elderly patients with kidney diseases, with respiratory diseases. So there are around polypharmacy, especially in the old age. So they have to be new anti-epileptics, and there have been many considerations that you do in patients who undergo epilepsy management. Age, cost, syndrome, what type of seizure does the patient have? For example, if you want to use a drug for a complex partial seizure patient, then the drug of choice is different versus the patient with generalized tonic-clonic seizures or myoclonic seizures or retonic seizures. So type of seizure, type of syndrome, what is the age? For example, pregnancy, the safest drugs are lamotrigine and levetiracetam. So depending upon what is the age of the patient, what is the gender of the patient, what is the side effect that is acceptable, seizure frequency, but more or less the main important are type of epilepsy and the side effects of the medicine, which are very important. So the first generation anti-epileptics were here like bromide, phenobarbital, phenytoin, carbamazepine. So these were the first generation. Then came the second generation, valproate, clonazepam, clobazam, diazepam. And then the third generation, which is felbamate, perampanel, lefusamide. So all these anti-epileptics, many other anti-epileptics, even pregabalin, gabapentin, GABA and analogs. So these are new. So starting from very early, so now what is the reason for development of these newer anti-epileptics? So whenever you want to develop a new drug, the reason for that is that it has a better efficacy from what the drugs existing, and it leads to lesser side effects. And that is the reason. So it has an equivalent efficacy. So most of these drugs have an equivalent efficacy as compared to the older anti-epileptics, and they have increased tolerability. So I'll not go into details. There are many mechanisms of action on acting. Some act on sodium channel, some on calcium channel, some on fast inactivation, some on slow inactivation. We'll discuss some of these in the later part of the talk, but more or less. So in SANAD 2, which is one of the very important studies, it has been shown that there have been levetiracetam, zonisamide and lamotrigine have been compared for newly diagnosed focal epilepsy. It has been proven that they are equally, if not more efficacious than the older anti-epileptics. So let us come to the case scenario. A 45-year-old businessman having normal breast development had a history of febrile seizures when he was at 9 months of age. There was his family history of seizures. The patient has an age of onset of seizures around 14 years. He has a frequency of seizures around 2 to 3 per week. It is mostly nocturnal and are generalized tonic-clonic seizures in night. So when you think of this history, this has a positive family history of febrile seizures, nocturnal seizures, GTCS 2 to 3 per week. There are no neurocutaneous markers. So you think, okay, the patient most likely has an autosomal dominant nocturnal frontal lobe epilepsy, which is one of the common type, not so common type of epilepsy. So it really originates in the frontal lobe, and there are certain medicines which work well in this, especially carbamazepine, one of my favorite molecules. Works very well in autosomal dominant nocturnal frontal lobe epilepsy. But this patient, because he was having GTCS, as is true with us, we give valproate or levetiracetam first in these patients who present with generalized tonic-clonic seizures. So this patient was also started on that, and subsequently carbamazepine was added. The seizure frequency from 1 per week came down to 1 per month, and clobazam was added. The seizure frequency further came down once in every quarter, and then finally lefusamide was added. So lefusamide, after addition of lefusamide, the patient has been seizure free. Now, if you compare these drugs versus lefusamide has a completely different mode of action of all of these drugs. So valproate acts on sodium channels and many other modalities. Oxcarbazepine also acts on sodium channels. Clobazam is a different molecule altogether. Lefusamide has a different onset of action altogether. So lefusamide is a newer anti-epileptic, has a different mode of action, and is very efficacious. So it is like patented, started approved in 2008 by US FDA for children, for patients more than 17 years old, mainly in partial onset seizures to begin with. So initially the lefusamide was approved for partial onset seizure and was not approved for generalized tonic-clonic seizures. Initially it was approved as an add-on drug, but later on it was approved as monotherapy as well. So it has a novel dual mode of action. X enhances the slow inactivation of voltage gated sodium channel, and it doesn't affect the fast inactivation. And why is it important? We'll see. Because if it affects the fast channel, then it also starts affecting your cognitive ability. So it only affects the slow inactivation, not the fast inactivation. And that is one of the reasons that lacosamide is very well tolerated and has less side effects on cognition. Coming on to its pharmacodynamic profile, it has very less drug-to-drug interaction. So it is one of the molecules specially to be used in old age. So when the patient is on polypharmacy, he is taking many antiplatelets, statins, antihypertensives, oral hypoglycemics. So you want a medicine, you want a drug which doesn't have interaction. And one of the important thing about lacosamide is it has less interactions. You can give it as a bolus dose intravenous, so you can even use it in status epilepticus. And if you want to give it orally, it is a very good bioavailability, doesn't have intra-variable variation, and one of the important thing is it has less of protein binding, so it has bioavailability is very high. Polymerase distribution also is good. So it doesn't interact. So this is very important. Doesn't interact with other anti-epileptic. For example, if a patient is taking valproate, you add lacosamide to it. It doesn't interact. If you add carbamazepine, which is an enzyme inducer itself, to valproate, obviously it will change the protein binding. So the older anti-epileptics which have more protein binding, which are mainly enzyme, which get altered by enzyme induction or inhibition, they have interaction. Now, one of the important problems in treating epilepsy, especially in children, is that the patients, sometimes you are not able to classify seizure because the child mostly, they don't give you exact history and videos are not available. So patient can have atonic seizure, tonic seizure. Sometimes these patients have syndromic epilepsies and these patients have multiple seizures, tonic, atonic, myoclonic, absence, all of these combined. And that is why, moreover, associated mental retardation and behavior issues are very common in children. So you want a drug which doesn't affect the cognition. And nowadays, the most common question that is asked by the parents of a children, especially coming to our OPD, is कि डॉक्टर साहब इसके दिमाग पे तो कोई प्रभाव नहीं पड़ेगा. And that is one of the important questions. So lacosamide in that way is very safe. It doesn't affect your cognition and it doesn't cause sedation. So this is one of the ideal drugs for children because if it doesn't affect cognition, if it has no effect on sleep habit, it is a very good drug. So it has been approved in children 4 years or older as an adjunctive therapy, and now it has been very commonly given as primary therapy as well. So starting dose is 2 mg per kg per day for monotherapy or for adjunctive therapy, again the same. But the loading dose is not recommended in both the forms, but we do load very frequently with lacosamide. So this is one of the very versatile molecule, can be used as monotherapy, can be used as a first add-on, can be used in special population women with epilepsy, can be used in patients with status epilepticus, and it has very less effect on cognition, anxiety and depression. So it in fact has a positive outcome on cognition. So coming on to the next case scenario, a 19-year-old female with normal birth and development, age of onset of 15 years, the patients present with typical aura of uneasiness and then GTCS with a head version, frequency of 1 per 3 months, and triggering factor is sleep deprivation. So when you think of these females coming with seizures precipitated by sleep deprivation, you think that the patient is most likely having some juvenile myoclonic epilepsy component, and then you need to ask whether the patient has early morning myoclonus or not, and this patient had it. So this patient is a typical JME patient. These are the discharges in the video EEG. So she was very well controlled on valproate and levetiracetam are the drug of choice for patients who have myoclonic epilepsy, any type of myoclonic epilepsy. Even it is progressive myoclonic epilepsy, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. So valproate, levetiracetam are broad spectrum patients who have GTCS, absences, partial seizures, myoclonic seizures. They have a combination. Valproate and levetiracetam are two most commonly used molecules, especially if the patient is pregnant or in a childbearing age. Because she was planning for marriage, valproate was changed to lamotrigine. And lamotrigine led to worsening of myoclonus, but the GTCS was well controlled. Levetiracetam was added. Seizures were well controlled, but then the side effect of levetiracetam, behavioral side effect. So if patient starts becoming irritable, especially in intrapartum state when the mood is already very variable, it's very difficult to recognize whether it is due to pregnancy or whether it is due to levetiracetam. So the patient was changed to brivaracetam, which is a new molecule, which is a congener of levetiracetam, which has the same drug profile but has a different side effect profile. Why? Because they have eventually originated from pyracetam. Levetiracetam as well as brivaracetam both have originated from pyracetam, and eventually they have been into different family. One is brivaracetam family and one is levetiracetam family, from on which levetiracetam belongs. So the difference between levetiracetam and brivaracetam is levetiracetam acts on synaptic vesicles plus AMPA. Why? Brivaracetam acts only on synaptic vesicles and not on AMPA. And AMPA is the reason why you have behavioral side effects in patients who are on levetiracetam. So those patients who have behavioral side effects on levetiracetam, they can be shifted easily to brivaracetam and avoid these behavioral side effects at the same point of time having almost the same efficacy as levetiracetam. So it has a flexible dose study. The dose ratio of levetiracetam to brivaracetam is 1:10, and then you can switch immediately. For example, in the morning the patient is taking 500 mg of levetiracetam twice daily, and in the evening you can give him brivaracetam 50 mg. So just divide by 1/10 and you switch. You don't need to do any titration, you don't need to wait, you don't need to load, nothing. Just switch if the patient having behavioral side effects. It's very common. If you ask the patient, they'll give you some of these behavioral side effects. So this was one of the pivotal study in which brivaracetam was completed, and mind you, so the more than 10% of the patients in this study, which was the pivotal study for brivaracetam, was from India, which some of us probably don't know. India is the capital for drug trials, which was recently exposed in one of the series known as Humans, if you have watched it or not. So India is the laboratory of the world. So it is a broad real world clinical use was limited, but you can immediately switch it to levetiracetam. The main adverse events are somnolence, dizziness and behavioral adversements. So these can be used in patients who have stopped levetiracetam because of some tolerability reasons, and the gradual dose reduction escalation is not required. So it's an adjunctive therapy. Currently, brivaracetam is only approved as an add-on therapy or in partial onset seizures. But we have been very frequently using it in generalized tonic-clonic seizures as a monotherapy as well, and it has been working well. And it can be taken oral tablets, like if food has no interaction, no dose adjustment in patients. So one of the very important factors when we change levetiracetam to brivaracetam, other than behavioral side effect, is if the patient is having chronic kidney disease. So if the patient's creatinine is high, because levetiracetam is only secreted by the kidneys, so we change to brivaracetam, which is very common in elderly. So I'll just rush through it. The half-life is almost common. They are similar molecules. And so next case, a 14-year-old girl, normal birth and development, no family history, born of consanguineous marriage, seizures from 10 years of age. And the types of seizures are, she has some visual aura, sees orange light, some myoclonic jerks, GTCS. Neurological examination is absolutely normal, and these are the discharges in EEG that you see in during video EEG. So patient started on levetiracetam, patient didn't benefit, we kept on having seizures, started on valproate, subsequently perampanel was added and the patient became immediately seizure free. So this brings us to one of the most important things that nowadays we use, which is precision medicine. So these patients who are resistant to anti-epileptic drugs should undergo exome sequencing, should undergo enzyme inducer tests, which are very cheaply and very easily available. Because if they have a certain type of epilepsy syndrome, they are going to respond very well to certain drugs which have on certain gates. So it's very important that you do this, and if you found that the patient has Lafora-Coated disease, and now the patient is seizure free on valproate, zonisamide and perampanel. So coming on to perampanel, there are three classes of ionotropic receptors. Basically it acts on glutamate receptors, and AMPA is the main receptor which has which mediates the rapid effects of. So glutamate has two effects. One is the rapid and one is the slow. The rapid one is mediated by AMPA, and it is the fast component of EPSP, while the slow component is mediated by NMDA. So NMDA is very important for cognition. Anything which acts on NMDA will lead to downing of cognition. So perampanel acts only on AMPA, which is a very good molecule. If you see in this chart, what I am trying to show is, if you do NMDA receptor block, the patient will continue to have symptoms. But if the patient will be given AMPA blockade, he or she will do very good. So it's selective for AMPA receptor. There is no significant affinity for relevant other receptors. There are no affinity for the glutamate binding receptors. It has a long half-life. Food doesn't affect it. It has to be taken once daily. You'll have to slowly titrate it. The only side effect is sometimes the patient can have behavioral side effects. This was the reason the levetiracetam was switched over to brivaracetam gradually, because levetiracetam has behavioral side effects because of acting on AMPA. This drug acts on the same receptor. So this drug has some behavioral side effects issues, but that's the only thing. Otherwise, pharmacokinetically, it's a good drug. Has a good protein binding, very high protein binding. So it has been approved as an adjunctive treatment for focal epilepsy. So to summarize, it acts on glutamate neurotransmission, mainly acts on AMPA, and underlies the fast component of EPSP. Now there are other medical drugs as well. I'll just run through them very fast. Vigabatrin is mainly approved for reflex epilepsy. It is now very less available, but it is one of the drug of choice for hypsarrhythmia patterns. So the patients who present very early onset with flexor spasms within first year, West syndrome as we call it, infantile spasms. So it has been the hormonal treatment. I'll just go through very fast. This is the adult dose, which is very important. But not everybody is using Vigabatrin. Vigabatrin has been used specifically by pediatric neurologists who are very frequently treat these patients of West syndrome or infantile spasm. It has been excreted in urine. Ducanamide is again one of the very important drugs, especially used in atonic seizures in Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. Felbamate acts on NMDA sodium channel and non-MDA glutamate receptors. It is also used in Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. So these newer drugs are very commonly used in childhood epilepsy syndrome because these patients tend to have many types of seizures. So if you want, and they will never be controlled on a single drug. You start one drug, the patient's seizure will go down, and suddenly after 3 or 6 months, that patient is going to come. We'll say, okay, the seizures are now again come back. So that's one of the things. You'll have to keep switching these things. So cenobamate is one of cannabidiol. So this is now like one of the blue-eyed things in neurology. It's basically the legalization of cannabinoids for treating epilepsy, especially drug-resistant epilepsy. And there's been a lot of hue and cry about using of cannabinoid derivatives as a treatment modality. So it's been licensed for use in US, but still has pending approvals in India. Some of them are pending. I'll just run through it fast. So precision medicine tells you which drug to use. So there are drugs, if you use it even in very less dose, they will work very well for you. And there are drugs, even if you use at a very high dose for a very long duration, they will not work. Precision medicine tells you which medicine to use, at what doses will cause the maximum effect. You can do whole exome sequencing, you can do the enzyme diffuser studies, for example, for carbamazepine, for phenytoin, and these are very important. So epilepsy, we know, is a multifaceted complex. Lacosamide is one of the major important molecules in focal epilepsy, perampanel in generalized and myoclonic epilepsy. Brivaracetam is used in both focal as well as generalized as well as unknown onset. And cenobamate is one of the drugs which is to be watched for because this is going to come up as a very good molecule with a very good drug profile and very nice, very good side effect. As I am an interventional neurologist, I have requested Dr. Chauhan to give me 5 minutes additionally so that I can show you something about.
आप बोलिए, इधर मेरी तरफ देखिए, मेरी तरफ देखिए.
So I'll show you some cases of acute stroke. I am basically an interventionist. My special area of interest is acute stroke. So epilepsy again, because being a physician, being a neurologist, we do treat it. So I'll discuss some cases with you. Only 3-4 cases, and I'll want your full attention on it. So this was a 71-year-old male presented with left hemiparesis dysarthria, facial palsy, very early in the course, 2-hour window. The MRI showed the right MC infarct, and MR angiography showed the right IC occlusion. So this is the left ICA, these are both the ACAs, and the right ICA you cannot see. So the right ICA was occluded, and this is the infarct.
जैन साहब, आप बोलिए, इधर मेरी तरफ देखिए, मेरी तरफ देखिए, इधर देखो, जैन साहब, इधर देखो, हाथ उठाओ, ये लेफ्ट हाथ उठाओ, ये वाला.
So he cannot move his left side of the body, he cannot speak, he has a gaze deviation, he has severe dysarthria, he has a right IC occlusion. And if you don't do anything, all of this right side of the brain is going to get white and it will be irreversible damage. So what we did was, we opened the artery and this was the patient immediately after surgery.
हाथ उठाओ बाबूजी, खब्बा हाथ उठाओ, खब्बा, ठीक है, पैर उठाओ.
So this was the patient immediately after surgery. This patient I operated on the day of Deepavali. So this is my bestest Diwali gift ever. So this patient still lives, still calls me up every month, and whenever I put up on his status, he will call me up and say like, you are doing very good and this and that. And this patient again, a 7.5-year-old, he presented very late, 8 hours after the stroke onset. Right hemiplegia, aphasia, IC occlusion, and if you see CT perfusion maps, this is blue, this is not blue, and this is red. So if you don't do anything, this blue will, so blood flow is reduced but blood volume is maintained. The patient has penumbra, and if you see the right ICU is occluded from here. So this was the patient.
बाबूजी नाम बताइए बाबूजी
He doesn't understand anything, doesn't speak, right side is paralyzed. He came to us 8 hours after stroke, 8 hours. Previously we used to say, okay, stroke patients can be only be treated very early in the course. So this was the IC which was occluded. We took this is the guiding sheath, we took small aspiration catheters up. We took the aspiration catheter, deployed a stent, sucked this clot out, and this was the patient. So this was the recanalization and this was the patient. Next thing. Again, one case, one of my favorites. This patient came very early. He was a chain smoker, 56-year-old male. Woke up at 12 a.m. to go to washroom, could not walk, and he had right hemiplegia.
बाबूजी नाम बताओ अपना हाथ दिखाओ ठीक है हाथ ऊपर करो उल्टा हाथ बाबूजी उल्टा हाथ
So left side is not moving, he has facial deviation. So this was the clot, this was the right side which was involved, this was the vessel which was blocked here. We went in, this was the ICA block, we took the aspiration catheter up, opened the artery. This was the patient. The next day. So this is what mechanical thrombectomy does to you. If you do it in the right patient at the right time. This is the patient. Now look at this patient. Now this patient came to us comatose. GCS was E1, V1, M1 within 2 hours. Woke up in the morning suddenly unconscious, not responding to anything. Basilar artery we examined was blocked. So if you don't do this patient will die in next 4 hours. And we realized that it is a posterior circulation stroke, basilar artery is blocked. We took our catheter up, deployed a stent. If you can see these markers, this is the stent. And you compare this artery to this artery. This is both the vertebrals joining to make a basilar artery. These are two PCAs and superior cerebellar artery. And the patient was fine. Now, very late, 16 hours. This patient was working at some industry and he went to here and there and he was having difficulty, he was in between recovering, was having weakness, and in between he was recovering. Many episodes of transient right hemiparesis. He was a chain smoker, presented to us with left hemipons infarct. On examination we found on MRI that we don't see any vertebrobasilar system. This is right ICA, this is left ICA, no vertebral artery, no basilar artery, nothing. And this was the...
बाबूजी नाम बताओ हाथ उठाइए हाथ उठाओ दोनों हाथ ऊपर उठाओ हाथ ऊपर उठाइए पैर उठाओ दूसरा
We opened the artery and this is the patient. After 3 months, he still works, he is a laborer. He doesn't smoke anymore. He still works and he is the only breadwinner for his family. And if you don't do anything, he is going to die. With him, all his family members will be under debt. So mechanical thrombectomy is a wonderful, wonderful treatment, and if done in the right patients at the right point of time, one of the major limiting factor in mechanical thrombectomy in today's era is the late diagnosis of stroke. Secondarily, lesser availability of centers doing mechanical thrombectomy, and thirdly, which is the most important, is cost, money. So that is BLK stands out in Delhi NCR because we are the center who do the cheapest mechanical thrombectomy facilities in Delhi NCR. I am talking about whole of Delhi NCR, not of South Delhi, not of West Delhi, not of Ghaziabad, Faridabad, Noida. So I talk of whole of Delhi NCR. We do it in whatever rate possible because in our hospital we have convinced the management to take it as a life-saving treatment. And if it is a life-saving, you don't need money to treat. If the patient doesn't have money, he comes to us, he says, okay, we'll pay some amount. So the average charge for a mechanical thrombectomy patient in your area where we are sitting right now is around 8 lakhs. But if we do it in BLK, it will be around 4 to 5 lakhs. And that too can be negotiated. associated in a poor patient, we can go it down even in lesser level. And then on the top of it, you don't have to pay a single penny till the time you are done with this operation. Because the patient comes to emergency, you ask him, this is the treatment option. But the patient, the problem that I faced when I started with mechanical thrombectomy was that the patients wanted this procedure to be done, but they did not have money. But in emergency at 2 AM in the morning, who has 5 lakhs in his pocket? Even our credit cards probably will not have that much limit sometimes. So when I was a student, I was wondering, if I have a stroke, I didn't have that much money. So now we have taken full consideration from the hospital, and we do this procedure without asking for money. The patient directly goes to lab even without admission, and the patient gets operated, and this is how we generally operate. So we usually have information before the patient comes. We take the patient to lab. At some of these places you will see me, and all the voices you have heard are mine, because as a stroke interventionist you have to be on your toes 24/7, 365, whether it is Holi, Diwali or whatever festival. We have a team working for us. So even these patients who come very early, we do it almost free of cost. If the patient has money for us to take them to cath lab, and if they are ready to pay for DSA, we never say no for mechanical thrombectomy. Whether we manage, how we manage, that's our problem. But we treat all these patients with the full compassion and freedom that we treat anybody who has money. Thank you very much.
A very nice presentation by Dr. Vineet Banga. He not only talked about epilepsy, but he also talked about a topic which was not allotted actually, and we all enjoyed it. We'll have the question and answer session in the end.
I would request Dr. Amitabh Gupta sir to introduce our second speaker for today evening. Actually the star of the show, Dr. Rohit Bansal. I was introduced to him by Nitesh from BLK Max marketing team, who has been doing a wonderful job in South Delhi. And we were instantly impressed with him. And can you come here, Nitesh? Nitesh has been meeting most of you. An absolutely wonderful and charming guy. And he's made his mission that he is going to integrate South Delhi with BLK Max. So we are very thankful to you, Nitesh, for introducing us to such wonderful people. Nitesh, what he does is he has a method in madness. First he comes to my clinic, he introduces his speakers to me. Then I always I lure him into a small meeting with the speaker, and then we lure them into the big meeting. So there is a method in madness from both the sides, from Nitesh's side and from my side also. There is another CME in pipeline for all of you. I am yet to do the small meeting. So whoever is interested can call me. I'll call you for the small meeting with another speaker. Thank you, Nitesh. I would like Dr. Amitabh Gupta sir. Dr. Amitabh Gupta is a senior neurosurgeon at PSRI Hospital. He is a member of Physicians Forum of India. I would like him to introduce our honorable speaker, Dr. Rohit Bansal sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan. I'd like to introduce Dr. Rohit, who is senior consultant at BLK Max. And though he has done a lot of fellowship in spine and brachial plexus, peripheral nerve surgery, but today I think he will be talking about mostly about epilepsy surgery. So he's an excellent surgeon, as Dr. Chauhan was saying passing, and he has a number of publications as well as his areas of interest mainly spine surgery, but he also does neuro endoscopy and various brain surgeries too. So I hand over the mic to Rohit Bansal.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amitabh, and it's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. I hope I'm audible. So Dr. Vineet has already give us such a goosebumps with such nice presentations, and I know it's very late and all of you are tired and probably waiting for the food, but I'll quickly try to show you some very interesting cases about epilepsy. So I'm Dr. Rohit Bansal, I'm a senior consultant and unit head in neurosurgery in BLK Max Hospital. So every day this quote from a very famous saint tends to inspire me. As long as I live, so long do I learn. So every day we should inspire to learn something new, do something new, and most importantly teach something new. So I'll be talking briefly about the role of surgery in epilepsy. So why do we need surgery in epilepsy? Most importantly, when do we need surgery? So the most common indication for epilepsy surgery is the drug-resistant epilepsy. When do we define the epilepsy to be drug-resistant? So we say when there are persistent seizures despite adequate pharmacological treatment, which means when we give an adequate trial of 2, I think so the drug-resistant epilepsy basically means that when we give an adequate trial of at least 2 anti-epileptic drugs which fail to affect, which fail to control the epilepsy, that is when we should be concerned. So like I said, in adults, we define drug-resistant epilepsy as epilepsy which is not controlled by more than 2 drugs. And even in patients who continue to have seizures even after 2 years of treatment. In pediatric age group, the drug-resistant epilepsy can be labeled earlier if the patient has an encephalopathy or infantile spasms or catastrophic onset of epilepsy, or the seizure frequency is more than 1 a month despite drug. So what are the problems due to drug-resistant epilepsy? Patients usually have a cognitive decline, they have personality changes, they have depression and suicidal tendencies, patients have anxiety, patients have poor performance at work, there are chances of accidents, road accidents and drowning, and of course there is a high chance of mortality with epilepsy also. So what do we do in such cases? Whenever we encounter such a patient who is not responding to epilepsy, what do we do? The answer is surgery. I mean, that is a time when we should consider surgery and call a surgery. So I'll be briefly talking about different types of surgery that we do in epilepsy. So the goal of doing a surgery in epilepsy is to render a patient seizure free. Then at the same time the neurological function should not be affected, the memory, language and cognitive function should not be affected, and the most important thing is improve the quality of life. Like I said, the principles of surgery of epilepsy is first we determine the medical intractability, which means the drug resistance. Then we identify the region of the seizure onset. Then we evaluate the consequence of the surgical resection. And then finally we go for the surgical resection and remove the area which causes the seizures. So there are a lot of detailed evaluations that are needed to do before we go for the epilepsy surgery. MRI brain, EEG, video EEG, and of course we take the help of our neurology friends. So I'll come back to this flowchart later on. So the most common type of epilepsy surgery that we do is lesionectomy, which means that we identify a lesion in the brain which is responsible for causing epilepsy. So I'll discuss a very interesting case with you. So we had this 16-year-old boy who had recurrent seizures and he was on 3 anti-epileptic drugs. And he was referred to me by Dr. Vineet. And before this, for 8 months, he was diagnosed as a case of tuberculosis in the brain. And he was taking anti-tubercular therapy for 8 months. So this was an MRI scan. So at the onset, we discussed, me and Dr. Vineet discussed that this primarily doesn't look like tuberculosis. So I suspected this could be some malignancy or some other lesion. So after a thorough evaluation, we tried to counsel the family and the patient, and we decided that we should do surgery and remove it and see what exactly it is. So the lesion, the challenging part of the lesion was located in a very eloquent area of the brain, very important area of the brain. So now there is a challenge that the patient is intact. The patient is already taking tubercular therapy. What do you do? How do you do this? So again, after meticulous planning and workup, we use navigation in this case. This is a computer-aided navigation technique which helps us pinpoint and localize the lesion in the brain so that we do not damage the normal tissue. This is a very, very precise tool. This is a computer-aided thing. So with the help of navigation, we made a very small focus craniotomy. This is craniotomy, the opening is almost the size of a coin. Such a small focus craniotomy. But after I opened the skull, there was another challenge. I could not differentiate the tumor. Is the tumor visible? It's not visible. So here we use another technique because intraoperative dyes, we give intraoperative dye. So this is how the tumor suddenly becomes fluorescent. It becomes emergent. And we did this lesionectomy, and this is how the lesion came out. And this was the lesion which was excised. And the biopsy came out to be a ganglioblastoma. It was not tuberculosis. And this boy was rendered seizure-free after this, and the anti-tubercular therapy was stopped, and the medication for seizures were weaned off. Another very interesting case was, this was again 24-year-old girl referred to me by Dr. Vineet. So she was having drug-resistant epilepsy. She was on 5 anti-epileptic drugs, and the family was worried because the girl had to be married after 2 months. So she was having recurrent epilepsy, recurrent seizures. So her MRI basically showed a small lesion here. This was near the motor cortex. So Dr. Vineet referred the case to me that can you remove it? I said, of course we can. But he said that I don't want the patient to get any neurological deficit because she is getting married after a month. So again in this case we used computer-aided navigation. So navigation again helps us pinpoint the exact location of the tumor without damaging the normal tissue. So in this particular case, I used a special technique. The lesion was here. The lesion was pinpointed in this particular location. So if you see this black area, this is the sulcus. This is the CSF filled space. So with the help of navigation, I entered the brain through this sulcus without damaging, without touching the normal brain. And when I reached here, I could easily take the lesion out without giving any deficit to the patient. This was the lesion and came out to be a calcified granule. Dr. Vineet knows this case, and I think she is off the antiepileptics now. So another type of important surgery is the resection surgeries for the epilepsy. So the most common lobe in the brain which is responsible for epilepsy is the temporal lobe, and the mesial temporal lobe most common. And the extratemporal lobe is the frontal lobe. The next to temporal lobe is the frontal lobe, which is the most common. Again, this is a very important, interesting case. This was a 22-year-old girl from Iraq. So she was having refractory epilepsy for the last 4 years, and she was taking 5 anti-epileptic drugs. And she was having cognitive decline and was having personality changes. She was even having suicidal tendencies. So we did this MRI and video EEG and thorough workup by Dr. Vineet, but we could not find any lesion except for some areas of hyperintensity near the left frontal region in the near motor cortex. So again, Dr. Vineet referred to me that can you remove this lesion without giving deficits? Again, a challenge for me. So in this particular case, apart from using the navigation, we use something called awake craniotomy, where we make the patient awake after making a craniotomy and do the intraoperative stimulation of the areas to see whether we are stimulating the right motor cortex or not. And we were able to do the complete resection using navigation, and the biopsy came out to be a astrocytoma, came out to be brain tumor. And after 6 months follow-up, she is again seizure-free. So I'll finally come on to the last and most important type of epilepsy surgery, which is the temporal lobe resection. So temporal lobe resection can be of again multiple types. So this patient was a 20 years old girl, again on 5 drugs for last 3 years. She was anxious, depressed, personality changes. So we did the MRI and thorough workup. We found that she was having a mesial temporal sclerosis. This is the most common form of most common reason for epilepsy. So we decided to do a temporal lobe resection in this case. So this is a small video I'll show you. So this is after making a small dura. This is the temporal lobe which is exposed. So the first step is we measure the extent of temporal lobe that has to be resected using a scale. So usually I measure about 5 cm from the pole, 4 to 5 cm from the pole. So this is marking the extent of resection. The first step is we mark the resection extent, and then we remove the near cortex. This is called the temporal lobe resection. After we do this temporal lobe resection, we encounter something called the limbic system, the amygdala and the hippocampus. So this area, this is the amygdala and this is the hippocampus. So the resection of this particular area is the most important to achieve successful epilepsy surgery. So this is the step number 2. And here we can see I'm resecting the amygdala and the hippocampus here. And this is the surgical cavity after resection, and that's the third cranial nerve we can see in the systems. That's the resected surgical cavity. Like I said, the first step would be marking the extent of the resection of the temporal lobe. And this is the exposed amygdala and this is the hippocampus. So resection of this particular area is most vital for removing the getting rid of the epilepsy. This is the surgical cavity after resection. And this is the post-operative CT scan. So again, there are multiple types of surgeries which are there for doing the controlling the epilepsy, multiple subplan transactions, vagal nerve stimulation, and of course deep brain stimulation. So to conclude, surgery is an effective and underexplored tool for treating epilepsy, and it can significantly cut down the mortality and morbidity and improve the quality of life of the patient. We need a thorough evaluation. Of course, there is a large armamentarium we can choose from, but we have to carefully choose what kind of surgery we have to do for what kind of epilepsy. And a close follow-up, of course, as well. In the end, I would say we should have no fear of perfection because we can't never reach it. So keep trying. Thank you very much. The house is open for discussions and comments, please.
Thank you, Rohit. I think first thing I would like to add that around 30% of the epilepsies are refractory, medically refractory epilepsy, and even after surgery, what he said, you need to continue the patient on anti-epileptic. So you cannot stop the anti-epileptics immediately, and it is only gradually that it has to be tapered, and sometimes some anti-epileptic have to be continued if you have to get a control of epilepsy. So important is that surgery in certain cases is a cure, but in cases of pure epilepsy where you don't find a lesion, there are what you call as a major surgery, what we call as disconnection things, and like vagus nerve stimulation is talking where no other thing works, you can do vagal nerve stimulation and DBS. So I think it is open to full house. You can ask questions about epilepsy and surgery. Thank you.
I would request Dr. Rohit Bansal sir to sit here. Actually, I had requested Dr. Rohit to have some slides on deep brain stimulation. As you know that Dr. Banga was very interested in showing the acute interventions. So Dr. Rohit is also doing deep brain stimulation in association with Dr. Prasad, who is heading the unit of neurology there. But we have left it today. I must inform you, it is 10:10. We have 20 minutes for interaction. I will open the dinner at 10:30. After that, nothing will be recorded. So we are recording only till 10:30. After that, you may say anything, you may ask anything, will not be recorded, will not be on YouTube. My first question, with the permission of our chairperson, Dr. Bhaskar, to Dr. Vinit Banga. Sir, if you have a case of an aneurysm which is ruptured, do you have kind of a setup where you are intervening immediately? It's kind of a PCI for cardiology. So how does it work in your setup?
I'm glad you asked this question. So aneurysm is equally an emergency, or I'll say as emergent situation, and a ruptured aneurysm is as emergent a situation as a vessel block. So I treat both the things similarly. In some ways it is bleeding, the other it is blocked. So we take undertaking in these cases also with the patient. We tell them, okay, this is the patient, this is the complaint, and this is what we want to do. And we have a blanket approval from the hospital to go ahead if the patient is agreeing to the agreement. So again, we don't ask the patient to deposit anything, and we have the setup. We have a biplane lab, which is the best in the sector to operate on these patients, and we have probably done together many cases, because some of the cases Dr. Rohit also sends to me, and some of the cases which come directly from under me as well. So we have the setup, we have the will, we have the expertise to do any neuro intervention, be it aneurysm, coiling, mechanical thrombectomy, AVM embolization, fistulas, any.
Thank you. Sir, what is the cost of coiling an acute aneurysm in your setup?
So the average cost depends upon the size of the aneurysm, but the average size aneurysms are around 4 to 5 millimeters. So in these aneurysms, the cost goes maximum around 6. 4 to 6. So if the aneurysm is smaller and you want to put in less coils, the cost is less. If the aneurysm is bigger, the bigger it gets, the more coils you need, the amount goes on increasing. So even the flow diverters, which usually cost around 50 lakhs here in South Delhi, we do it around 8-10 lakhs.
So we know that the problem in India, as far as the brain issues are concerned, is not the same as time is muscle. Time is brain is yet to pick up. Do you have an awareness program? Do you have an emergency service? Your comment.
So we do have an awareness program. We do take awareness talks. We do reach out to people. We have YouTube channels. We have awareness videos reaching out through Facebook channel, through YouTube, through my personal channel, Instagrams, everywhere. And along with that, we have an emergency setup. If you give a call to the emergency number, the ambulance will come and pick you up, and the emergency team is almost always ready with all the modalities of imaging and the intervention. So our stroke to detail time is almost at par with the international level.
So what is the best time to intervene as far as the aneurysms are concerned? What is your advice to all my physician friends?
So as soon as possible, a ruptured aneurysm can re-rupture at any point of time. So you need to do intervention as soon as possible. So preferably within 48 hours of rupture. So the more you delay, the more are the chances that the aneurysm will re-rupture, because the maximum re-rupture risk is in first week, and especially within first 24 to 72 hours. So it is like same as ischemic stroke. Treat it as early as possible, because you are going to have the same side effect profile even after 5 days, when the benefit will suddenly go down. So that's very important.
I would take a minute to relate to all of my friends an issue of aneurysm in my own close family. One of my relatives was in US, a 30-year-old boy. Can Dr. Pallavi, please listen, please. It's important. He used to go for a walk with his friend every day in the evening. So they had an appointment, they met each other, and then this relative of mine, he said, I'm just coming in 5 minutes after changing into my tracks. He didn't come in 15 minutes time. So the other boy ran upstairs. Fortunately, his room was open, and he saw that the boy was lying unconscious, breathing very heavily. He rang the ambulance services. He was taken to the general hospital first. He was diagnosed as a case of acute stroke. On the CT there was hemorrhage, and it was on DSA it was diagnosed to be a case of aneurysm. He was shifted to Stanford, which was nearby. They did the coiling. It was 26th of January. Me and my wife, we had gone for an outing in Bhatta Lake. When we were returning, I got a call. It was a very, very close relative. That the boy now is on ventilator, the neurosurgeon wants to speak to you. So he talked to me and he said that so and so is very sick. I need your consent because your brother has given the name as you to give the consent. We want to do the query. I said, please do the needful. I had a friend in US who is a bone marrow transplant specialist. I asked him, requested him to go over there, and he said, I'm starting, don't worry. Very few friends in US who would say that, to travel 5,000 kilometers. Next day morning, I called my friend, he said, I'm just entering the hospital, and your nephew is just opening his eyes, he is now off ventilator. The coiling had been done. That is the importance of dealing with aneurysms. He was fortunate. He is now a leading, I would say, IT specialist in Sweden. He shifted from US to Sweden. And my wife had some friends in US who helped tremendously. So it is so important to intervene. And the best time to intervene is the golden hour. But unfortunately, it's not true every time. Golden second hour, golden 3 hours, golden 4 hours, golden 5 hours. Sir, what is the threshold after which you say no use?
Ischemic stroke.
Yes, sir.
Sir, ischemic stroke, as of now, the window which is in the guidelines is 24 hours. So after 24 hours, usually we don't intervene because of one reason is that the infarct is already established. The two is we don't have guidelines. But this window is gradually expanding, and we are now, previously we used to say that we have to see how much of the time has passed. Now we see in our perfusion scans or MRI how much is the tissue is there. If you have a vessel which is blocked and the vessel which is supplying this area, that area can still be saved. So we even go beyond it. So if the patient has, for example, a hemiplegia and an aphasia and he has a MC occlusion, for example, he comes at 25 hours. Won't we do it? We will do it. Because 24 hours is in the guideline, but 24 hours is the upper limit that is in the guideline. So usually yes, 24 hours, but it's very soon going to expand.
Sir, I asked you these questions because you specialize in intervention, okay? But you had a topic on role of surgery in epilepsy, newer trends in epilepsy. Dr. Rohit Bansal is the right person to ask that question. Sir, my question to you is, we have the classical epilepsies and you spoke of the new molecules. New molecules also have a lot of side effects. I want to ask you the role of the gold standard and age-old phenytoin in role of generalized tonic-clonic seizures. Is there any role, or we have newer molecules, newer friends, newer elements, newer players? Is there any role of phenytoin?
So whenever, if you have new friends, that doesn't mean that you leave old friends. Old is gold. So no matter whether you have Glenfiddich or something, you stay old monk holds good. So the same way is for phenytoin. Phenytoin still is a very good drug. It has side effects of its own if used for very long term. But for example, a patient presents to you in status epilepticus, and the only molecule that you have available is phenytoin. So phenytoin has been used for so many years, for so long. It is done wonderful. So even in status, even in generalized tonic-clonic seizures, in these patients acute emergency, phenytoin works wonderfully. So phenytoin still has a role. The problem with phenytoin is if you use it for a very long time, the patients have side effects like gum hypertrophy, osteomalacia, cerebellar atrophy. So these are some of the side effects that are worrisome, and we have gradually shifted to safer molecules like levetiracetam, which is almost equal efficacy but are relatively safe. As I say relatively, you already said that the new molecules also have side effects. They are not side effect free, but they are relatively safer if you use for long term, because most of the anti-seizure medications are used for a very long time.
Sir, often we see prescriptions from BLK Max of something called a middle spray, midazolam spray. What is the role of that spray in acute manifestations of epilepsy or maybe status epilepticus?
So the mainstay of use of midazolam nasal spray is at home when you don't have an injectable treatment available, or somebody who has it at home and nobody is there to give him that injection. So even lorazepam or midazolam injections, they were good, but at home you will not be able to do it. So the patient has seizures, it works as an SOS medicine. For example, you are traveling in a train, the patient has a seizure. Now what would you do? The train won't stop in between. So in that case, you give spray of midazolam as per weight, and because these are nasally given spray, they have a very rapid onset of action, and these patients, they do very well. So the seizures, at least the patients are prevented to go into super refractory status or refractory status or status. So the seizures are aborted then and there by using midazolam spray. So that is the most important role of midazolam. In hospital, we usually give IV, we don't give midazolam even if it is available. So the sprays is for general public use, but it is very important that when you use midazolam spray, you have to prime it. This is very important. Whenever you give midazolam spray to a patient, tell the patient to prime it. For example, midazolam spray has been in fridge for 3 months. Now the patient has seizure. You cannot directly give it. You will have to get it out, shake it, take 4 puffs outside and then give it. Because those 4 puffs are priming, they are not medication. So it's very important that you tell the patient, because sometimes the patient will pick it up from the fridge and give it, and the seizures won't report, because those 5-4 sprays doesn't contain medicine, they are mostly air or some of the preservative mix. So you have to tell the patient about priming as well.
Great. I'm sure there must be many questions from the back before I come to Dr. Tulsi and Dr. Kala sir. Any questions from there, sir? Anyone is? Dr. HP Singh sir, you want to ask a question?
Yes. No.
Dr. PK Mangla sir has a question on the way.
What is the role of clipping now? You know, your coil is doing so well. I've seen number of cases of these coiling at women's. What is the role of clipping?
I think that is for a surgeon to advise, answer the question. Probably clipping still is the mainstay, not even here, even in US. The reason being that the easier aneurysm, or what you say, was diagnosed like even asymptomatically. There was a very big trial which is called a STITCH trial, you must have heard of. And so now the clipping is done for the cases which are complicated. So let me say, if the coil patient comes with a residual neck aneurysm, and if they are unable to coil it again, or it is in a location, or it is having a branch where a coiling might lead to again blocking of that major branch supplying a cognitive area which is important. Again clipping comes into role. So unfortunately clipping is now left for the cases which are much more complicated. Even cases where the coils have eroded the aneurysm, or let's say there is a mass effect because there is a giant aneurysm, you have coiled it. So it is pressing on an important part of the nerve or cranial nerve, or let's say part of the brain. So unfortunately the problem now is what has come even in papers is that maybe the neurosurgeons might not be apt with clipping if this continues, because more and more people are going for endovascular coiling. So the amount of clipping done for aneurysms, especially what you call as maybe cherry aneurysms, or which are very simple aneurysms, is now gone, because all are being coiled, maximally coiled. Because nobody would like to open his brain for if there is an option of coiling or any other intervention. So unfortunately, it is skill which is still there with surgeons, but again in future what is going to happen is difficult to say.
Once the patient's vessels go into spasm or develop infarcts, and you are still not coiled, how long do you wait?
So vasospasm again is a thing which is very well treatable endovascularly. So we give intra-arterial infusion of nimodipine and milrinone to dilate these vessels. We open it up and we coil the aneurysm. So in my career till now, like maybe I have coiled maybe 200, 300 aneurysms, and I have never had a problem with vasospasm leading me not being able to coil. So it happens, in fact, vasospasm comes after 5 to 7 days. Like the peak is around 7 days. 7 to 14 days is the peak time when the vasospasm comes. And in fact, through endovascular route, through these intra-arterial medications, you treat vasospasm to prevent these infarcts from happening. So endovascular route again is one of the main modalities. Surgical clipping obviously is one of the things that we could do in these patients who have vasospasm. Coming to your first question, clipping. So clipping is a wonderful, wonderful treatment. There is no doubt about it. If done with the right hands, with the right intent, clipping is a wonderful treatment. The problem is that nobody in today's time will go for a bypass for a single vessel disease.
Right.
So why would you like to open your skull for something which can be done with just a needle and the patient is walking the next day? That's the thing.
Sir, Dr. H.P. Singh sir has a question.
Sir, my question relates to the management of epilepsy by nicotinamide. You have suggested a wonderful drug for the management of the epilepsy, and this drug does not cause any side effect and development of the brain of the child. Means if you use the nicotinamide, the brain development will be normal, as you have suggested. So my question here, child having epilepsy, management nicotinamide, anything anti side effect of development by the epilepsy, they block the management of this epilepsy so that child will be normalized forever in the life. It's my question.
So lacosamide is a safe drug for children. It has been licensed to use for
You already
children
said-
more than 4 years of age, and it is a relatively safe drug. So the epilepsy in itself can cause problems with brain development and cognition. But when it comes to lacosamide has been found to be safe with regards to cognitive function and the brain development. For example, if the patient has a childhood epilepsy syndrome or an epileptic encephalopathy, his cognition is going to go down because of the disease itself, not because of the drug. So lacosamide that way is safe to control seizures, because the more number of seizures these patients have, their cognition is going to go down. So that's about lacosamide. So it's a relatively safe add-on drug, especially in children who are above 4 years old.
Dr. Gurmeet Bansal has a question.
Hello sir, I had a patient in the evening, early pregnancy, who had come for medical abortion. She is a lawyer by profession. She is taking Levipil 500 PD from last 10 years, and the last conversion was 10 years back. Can I safely give her mifepristone misoprostol combination, or is there any cross reaction between the drugs?
You can very comfortably give it. No problem about it.
Is there any gap to be kept between the two?
No, not at all. So just make sure that sometimes what happens when you operate and make the patient's NPO, you skip that one dose of levetiracetam. So the only thing we advise the gynecologist is to just shift these patients to IV levetiracetam if they are not being able to give oral levetiracetam, but you can give mifepristone and everything without any problem.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question from Dr. Vimal sir.
I'm a pediatrician. Which is the better route, oral or rectal route for the acute onset of any seizure?
So the rectal absorption is
Like we
preferred.
used to give diazepam through rectal route.
So what has happened is, so while the rectal route was chosen, because these patients who have an epilepsy attack mostly are unconscious. You cannot give them orally. So that is one of the things that we tell the patients, because if the patient has a seizure, he is drowsy, he is not fully conscious, if you give him something orally, he might aspirate. So that was the reason that the patients were given these rectal formulations. Nowadays, with these sprays being available, especially midazolam spray that we discussed, rectal diazepam or rectal diazepam has been lesser and lesser used even in US. So now the preferred modality is to give these nasal sprays which work very well, almost taken to the IV formulation.
Dr. Sushruth Almas has a question.
Sir, a dear friend, while doing surgery, he had a aneurysmal rupture. I asked her why later on he was in coma and a lot of problems, sternotomy. So the family history, he said that Chacha had a aneurysmal rupture. So do you recommend preventive or screening MRIs or family history? The second question is, every case of epilepsy Do you initially advise MRI or investigation, or what is the method?
So I'll answer the second question first. For every patient of epilepsy, he is at least to be evaluated by an MRI, a brain imaging. If MRI is not possible or not accessible, at least a CT scan and an EEG. Because some parameters or some syndromic epilepsy syndromes are such that by looking at the EEG, you can diagnose it to be a certain type of epilepsy with certain type of medicine. For example, slow spike in wave discharges in EEG will tell you, okay, this patient has an absence syndrome, and better to use valproate in this medicine rather than using carbamazepine. So that's the second question. The first question. Screening for aneurysms is recommended in special populations, such as those patients who have autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease. They are more prone to have aneurysms. Those patients who have who have aneurysms in the family. So I had a family in which one of the nephew had an aneurysm, then his mama also had an aneurysm. So from maternal side, so I screened everybody and I found aneurysm in 4 of these patients. And now the other thing is that if one aneurysm is ruptured in the same patient and there are other aneurysms, the chances of rupture increase in those. So if the patient has a ruptured aneurysm, usually we don't treat aneurysms less than 5 to 7 mm if they are not ruptured. But in these patients, in these special population, we do treat them also.
Dr. S.K. Podarkar has a question.
How commonly do you find cysticercosis as a cause of epilepsy?
Sir, in fact, it's the most common cause of epilepsy in India. Neurocysticercosis still is the most common cause of epilepsy in India.
Dr. A.K. Bala has a question.
Sir, how long the antiepileptics should be given?
That's a very difficult question. So, for example, if a patient has a syndromic epilepsy, for example, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, these patients will require the treatment for a very long time, probably all of their life. They can reduce the dose, but they require it. But for example, a patient has a neurocysticercosis, you repeat the MRI, the cysticercosis is gone. You can stop the treatment after 2 weeks. Doing a EEG, seeing whether there are discharges, whether there is any residual lesion. There is no residual lesion. EEG is fine. Stop the antiepileptic. Now, I have very frequently seen some patients having hyponatremia and seizures and they keep taking antiepileptic. So these patients, they are having secondary epilepsy. So secondary seizure, not even epilepsy. So as soon as the sodium normalizes, you stop the seizure because it's a prophylactic thing. So it depends upon what type of epilepsy you have, whether you have a genetic epilepsy syndrome, whether it is an acquired epilepsy, for example, LCC or tuberculoma, then you treat it accordingly.
And what is the minimum period we can give?
So usually 2 to 3 years is the minimum that we...
And if in between patient has got a seizure, then?
We will have to increase the dose or escalate the therapy. So what we usually use is we do the drug levels, we check the compliance first, we check the drug levels, and then if the drug level is not in therapeutic range, we increase the dose, or if it is in the therapeutic range, we add on another drug.
And if a patient has got multiple neurocysticercosis, in those cases, what is your line of?
So in NCC, mostly there are structural symptomatic epilepsies. My drug of choice is carbamazepine and clobazam.
I would request Dr. Tulsi sir to ask a question.
Finally, thank you, Dr. Chauhan. So those were some wonderful talks by Dr. Vineet and Dr. Rohit. So Dr. Rohit, the most common and the best understood procedure is the resection of the tissue in the temporal lobe, which causes seizure-free outcomes in 2/3 of the patients, and the success rate is 90%.
Very excellent question. Excellent question. Like I said, the cause of the epilepsy has to be ascertained. So before we make a patient ready for epilepsy surgery, we have to be very sure that this is the right candidate for treatment. So thorough and a meticulous workup is very, very important. Like I said, first of all, we need to localize the focus of epilepsy. Once we localize the focus to be able to in that case, resection is very, very effective. But that doesn't mean that we immediately take the patient off the anti-epileptic drugs. So anti-epileptic drugs have to be continued gradually.
Right. So talk us through the latest modality of choice in seizures, which is the focused ultrasound, which produces 2 therapeutic effects, One is the thermal ablation, the other is the neuromodulation, comes to the focused ultrasound, which is a non-invasive modality and is the latest. Tell us, sir.
It's a very new and researched technique for controlling epilepsy in what we call as functional neurosurgery. So stimulation, neurostimulation has been in place for neurosurgery like...
Can we have some decorum at the back, please? A lot of noise. Go ahead, sir.
Its neuromodulation has been employed in neurosurgery since a very long time. The most commonly used procedure was the deep brain stimulation, which has been in use for many indications. And the latest being used just for focus ultrasound that we spoke about. It is still being researched now, and the effectivity is still to be ascertained. And many people are debating that this may take over deadly brain stimulation. But eventually, the time and results will tell the numbers will tell us.
So, talking of my last question, talking about DBS versus the focused MRI guided ultrasound, so which is better? This focused ultrasound seems to be the latest modality and is non-invasive as compared to the DBS. So you need to put the hardware, you see, inside your brain, so it's an invasive procedure. And what is the success rate of DBS versus focused ultrasound?
Excellent question again. So this focused ultrasound again has to first stand the test of time. It is a very new modality. We do not know how effective and how successful this will be. So eventually, yes, of course, maybe if it's a non-invasive modality, this is obviously going to become a standard and gold standard procedure. But deep brain stimulation has stood the test of time. And deep brain stimulation, no matter what, is very, very effective. But we have to see that deep brain stimulation is not curative. It is only bringing down the dose of medications and improving the quality of life. So again, Dr. Amitabh.
Thank you, sir.
The focus ultrasound you just talked about, actually, I was there in University of Virginia and there it was research. It is only being used for tremor. And tremor, essential tremor, that's the only case. All other cases, just a minute. Let me just go completely. It is now FDA approved only for essential tremor, not for Parkinson, and it was the institute where I did my fellowship where it was used, and it was a paper which came out from that institute only. And the other thing which you said, it's a lesional. In DBS you don't create a lesion. In focus ultrasound you basically create a lesion. So what happens is that this is a non-reversible phenomenon. DBS is a reversible phenomenon. That means to say that I may stimulate or I may stop stimulation. If there are side effects, I can stop it and the side effects will go. But if you make a lesion, it won't go. That's the unfortunate part. The other thing is that usually in this, they have used it only for single side. Because they leave it again for the other side in case it is not working, or in Parkinson, you can do a DBS.
Sir, in paucity of time, I am asking two half questions and two comments. First comment about ambulances. We have ambulances differently, ACLS approved and all that. Do we have epilepsy or neurogenic or neurological ambulances? Specific ambulances for stroke and epilepsy? Because any ambulance, general ambulance may not be equipped with the paraphernalia to control stroke or epilepsy. Your comment?
Mostly ACLS ambulances are apt to deal with these situations who are stroke patients, because stroke patients what they require is, other than imaging, what they require is management of their and their blood parameters, so all those things. So ADC is what is required. So ACLS is equipped to deal with all the neurological emergencies. So you don't require another, if the patient has a stroke, there are new ambulances that have a CT, inbuilt CT, but they are very costly and they still haven't been used in India.
Sir, second comment is about ketogenic diet. It's specific or say beneficial for some type of epilepsy. Is it advisable to all or is it conservative?
Also modified Atkins diet.
So ketogenic or modified Atkins diet, so whatever diet modifications you do for epilepsy, they are advised for certain types, especially epilepsy in children. Drug-resistant epilepsy in children is one of the most common indications for these types of diets. The problem with these diets are they are very specific. It is very difficult to take them for a very long time that they have compliance, and that has been one of the main important reasons that they haven't stood the test of time, because the compliance becomes the main issue.
Sir, do we have in pipeline any modality to deliver drugs, anti-arrhythmic drugs, less frequently, like we are coming with once a week insulin, I could add. So do we have something for epilepsy to be given for a longer duration, any modality?
So not at present. One of the reasons is if you give anything which acts for a very long time, so whatever anti-epileptic you give, it acts on some channels. So the more the action, the more is the side effect. So you give a medicine which acts for a very long time means that it has a very strong inhibition of certain channels, and then it will cause more side effects.
Dr. Rana has a question.
सर थैंक्स, बड़ा अच्छा लगा। मैं हिंदी में ही पूछता हूँ सर, मेरे YouTube में फॉलोअर्स है, क्योंकि हमारे वीडियोस बहुत जगह पे जाते हैं। बहुत सारे पेशेंट्स हमारे पास आते हैं जिनको इरेक्टाइल डिस्फंक्शन होता है और वो सोडियम वाइब्रेट पे होते हैं। माय क्वेश्चन इज that the patients who are on sodium valproate or who are on anti-epileptic drugs, my question is, sir, when a patient is on anti-epileptic drug for 10 years, 15 years or 20 years and he is getting married and his marriage is getting disturbed, sir, क्या हम उस ड्रग को रिड्यूस कर सकते हैं या चेंज कर सकते हैं या कुछ ऐसा हम एक कॉम्बिनेशन बना सकते हैं जिसमें ईडी ना हो? क्योंकि सर बहुत सारी फैमिलीज खराब हो रही हैं, बहुत सारी फैमिलीज बर्बाद हो रही हैं।
तो सर बिल्कुल चेंज कर सकते हैं, डोज कम भी कर सकते हैं, डोज चेंज भी कर सकते हैं, लेकिन मैं आपको एक और बता दूं, जो मोस्टली जो एपिलेप्सी के पेशेंट्स होते हैं उनको ईडी होता है, ये ड्रग इंड्यूस ना होकर साइकोजेनिक होता है, बिकॉज दे नो उनको जो मेडिसिन ले रहे हैं और उनको इस बात का डर होता है जब स्ट्रेस फैक्टर आता है तो सडनली साइकोलॉजिकली उनको ईडी होने लग जाता है। तो 90% ऑफ दीस पेशेंट्स इवेंचुअली इफ यू डू प्रॉपर साइकोलॉजी काउंसलिंग।
सर मैं इससे डिफर कर रहा हूँ, आप अगर एंटी एपिलेप्टिक ड्रग देते हैं तो आप ब्रेन को हाइब्रिड मोड पे लाते हो, उसकी जो भी फंक्शन है वो कम हो जाती है। FSH, LH, प्रोक्टिन, टेस्टोस्टेरोन, हीमोग्लोबिन हार्मोन, सेक्स हार्मोन बैरिंग कैपेसिटी, सारे हार्मोन्स सर बिल्कुल प्रॉपर काम नहीं करते हो, इरेक्टाइल डिस्फंक्शन होगा।
जिन लोगों को है उनमें हम डोज एंड यू हैव प्रूवन इट टू बी बिकॉज ऑफ ड्रग रिलेटेड, यू कैन रिड्यूस द डोज, यू कैन चेंज द मेडिसिन, यू कैन स्विच टू अदर मेडिसिन, यू कैन रिड्यूस द डोज, सो यू कैन डू दैट।
अच्छा एक और क्वेश्चन सर, 20 साल पहले मेरे पास एक पेशेंट आया, छोटा बच्चा, उसको सीजर्स हो रहे थे और मैंने उसको डायज़ेपाम इंजेक्शन लगाया, उसके सीजर्स रुक गए और उसको दूसरे हॉस्पिटल में शिफ्ट किया गया। वहां पर डॉक्टर साहब ने बोला कि भाई इसको इंजेक्शन लगा तो इसकी वजह से ये रिवाइव नहीं हो रहा है, क्योंकि आप जाहिर सी बात है हम डायज़ेपाम लगाएंगे तो थोड़ा नींद आएगी, थोड़ा पेशेंट लेट भी उठेगा। तो सर ऐसे केस में हमको क्या करना चाहिए? क्योंकि देखिए दैट वाज अ वेरी टफ टाइम फॉर मी। मैं 2003-04 की बात कर रहा हूँ और मेरी एक लोकल प्रैक्टिस होती थी और उस इंसिडेंट की वजह से बहुत परेशानी हुई मेरे को, क्योंकि को मिस केस हुआ, पुलिस हमारे क्लिनिक पे आई और बहुत सारी प्रॉब्लम्स हुई। एज ए न्यूरोलॉजिस्ट क्या हमको उस वक्त करना चाहिए कि क्या मैंने वो सही किया था या नहीं किया था, कि आगे से कौन सा ऐसा ड्रग दिया जाए कि मेरी पेशेंट को डैमेज ज़्यादा ना हो और मेरी रेपुटेशन पे
वो थोड़ा सा पेशेंट को जरूर कॉज करेगी। अगर उस टाइम पे आप एयरवे मेंटेन नहीं करते हो तो पेशेंट को हाइपोक्सिमिक इंसल्ट हो सकता है, लेकिन इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि आप नहीं देते। तो पहला क्वेश्चन जो आपने किया वो बिल्कुल ठीक किया। दूसरी चीज जिस डॉक्टर ने ऐसा बोला है, जिस दूसरे बंदे ने ऐसा बोला, वो बिल्कुल गलत किया। बट ये हमारी स्पेशलिटी में बड़ी कॉमन है, सारी उंगलियां एक जैसी नहीं होती, सारे लोग एक जैसे नहीं होते। इवेंचुअली आप अगर आज मेरे सामने यहाँ बैठे हो तो इसका मतलब है आपके अगेंस्ट कोई भी केस हुआ हो तो इवेंचुअली नल एंड वॉइड हो गया होगा, बिकॉज जो आपने किया वो ठीक।
सर दूसरा केस सेम पेशेंट आया, मैंने बीपी नाप लिया, ही वाज हैविंग सम वोमिटिंग और समथिंग, मैंने बीपी नाप लिया, उसको सीजर्स आए, टेबल पे वो कोलैप्स किया, मैंने उसको उठा के गाड़ी में डाला, सदर हॉस्पिटल में एडमिट किया और उसकी डेथ हो गई। लेकिन उस वक्त मेरी किस्मत ये थी कि मेरे क्लिनिक में सीसीटीवी कैमरा था, तो तो उस वक्त भी हमारे ऊपर एलिगेशन लगे, लेकिन जो इन्वेस्टिगेशन ऑफिसर था उसने जब पूरी सीसीटीवी देखी तो दैट केस वाज इन माय फेवर। उस वक्त भी अगर मैं कोई इंजेक्शन अगर लगाता, वो अगर पेशेंट की डेथ होती, तो व्हाट वुड हैव बीन द आउटकम?
इन दैट केस पूरा हर तरह का साइड इफेक्ट होता है। सर आपने कुछ गलत नहीं किया, आपने जो किया पेशेंट की गुडविल में किया, एंड इट इज फाइन।
Dr. Banga, of all the questions that you have answered,